my name's Emma Lucchese. I'm the volunteer coordinator at Keystone Community Services, and then I'll let the other two introduce themselves.
Oh, I think y'all know me by now. I'm Tyler. I'm a Midway site manager. It's good to see you all in miniature today.
Hi, everyone. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Georgie. I'm the new director of basic needs. I see a lot of your familiar faces, so I feel like I've met the majority of you. It's nice to see you unmasked via Zoom, so that's pretty fun. Yeah, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
So we're kind of going to go through a PowerPoint that we have. It's going to talk through the layout of the food shelf, as well as our new shopping model, what the volunteer roles will entail. And then at the end, there's going to be a Q&A section.
Okay, so as you all know, we are meeting today to talk about return to in-person shopping. We are really excited to be able to offer in-person shopping again to our participants at the Midway food shelves. This change that we were making, we spent a lot of time planning and thinking about how we can streamline this process while making it safe for all of you, our staff, and the participants that we see day in and day out. We know that this is going to be safe for everyone because from what we know about COVID and the way that COVID spreads, and thinking about shopping at grocery stores, it is one of the more relatively safe activities that you can do during COVID. And we want to, if we can, continue to improve our services to make sure we're giving our participants the best experience possible. And that client choice model is so important to our families. And we want to make sure that if we can do it safely, that we are able to offer it again. So that's why we're here today. So the first thing that we want to cover with all of you today is the change in the food shelf layout. So we're making several different changes to optimize our space, to make sure the flow is smoother. And one of those things, as you can see, one of the biggest changes is the middle aisle of the food shelf. So if you can envision being at Midway, right now, if you close your eyes, you can envision the first aisles where the loose produce section is. And then in the middle there is, the back of the produce table. And then you can see there's in your mind, you can see, there's those bins where we store all those dry bags. And then on the other side of that is where we have all of our cooler items. So the dairy cooler, the deli cooler, and the meat freezer. So what we're going to do, with this change is completely eliminate that middle section. This will give us an opportunity to widen those outer aisles and give us more space for carts, for people to be in that space and allow social distancing. So that will be really great. So with the arrows, you can kind of see what the flow is going to look like. Families will be waiting in our lobby area. It will be 2 shoppers at one time. The first shopper will be admitted through. They'll go through on our left here, on their right. So they'll go to the first section will be now canned produce. So we're now shifting the canned fruits and vegetables forward to the front of the shelf or the food shelf. That will be before the loose produce section there. And so they'll walk through that first aisle, past loose produce, past grains, cooking and baking, and make a left. And then they will come around to snacks and beverages. And then they'll go to all of our cooler items, and then households and sweets will be at the very end. We are now going to use that middle section to store our carts and maybe additional boxes that we might have if we get a surplus from our food rescue delivery that morning or whatever. As you all know, we are always fighting for space at the food shelf. So I'm sure one way or another, we'll find something to put in that middle section. And then as families finish up their shop, they'll leave the dairy fridge area, the sweet section, and they'll go back out the door to the lobby and leave out the front door. So right off the bat, one thing that we are considering doing is once they finish their shop at the very end, so the dairy fridge section, we're thinking about maybe having a volunteer or a staff member meet the participant outside the storage shelf front door. So the participant will still walk out through the lobby, through the front door of the food shelf where now all of our families are coming in. And instead, a volunteer will take that individual's cart that they've finished shopping and meet them outside on the other side. We're thinking about how we can reduce bottlenecks and clutter and the number of things that families are going to have to carry in and out, and individuals that will have to carry as they are walking out when they finish shopping, just because you all know that lobby space is so limited. This is not something that's set in stone. Tyler and I are talking about piloting it tomorrow evening for our evening service and seeing how it goes. But just know when you arrive for your shift, and we're talking about roles, and we do that volunteer huddle at the beginning of the shift, Tyler or myself or another staff member will talk about, the roles for that day and what changes we might be implementing. We want to be flexible with this process, but nothing's off the table in terms of figuring out what's going to keep everybody safe, what's going to streamline this process, and also make sure that this flow is really efficient. One other thing that I forgot to mention is you can see at the very top left corner is a shelf for paper bags. So Tyler and I have started rearranging the food shelf this morning, and we have 2 shelves now where we're going to keep paper bags right at the front. So instead of having a packing station at the very end of the participant's shopping experience, we are now going to give them bags right when they start to encourage them to pack their groceries as they shop through. That hopefully will make things a little bit faster. So when they finish shopping, in theory, they would be able just to grab those bags, or when the volunteer meets them outside, they'd be able to grab those bags out of that cart and then they'd be ready to go. So they wouldn't have to worry about packing at the very end. We will still have boxes available for families too. One additional area Tyler and I are thinking about adding another shelf to store these paper bags and boxes is at the very back of the food shelf by the white door where the scale used to be, if you guys recall that. So that would be another place where we could store boxes and bags.
Another change, I'll just hop in really quick. Another change that will take place is we're actually going to move the volunteer sign-in station to the storage area. So when you walk in, you'll be walking in through the storage side, signing in. We'll also have a place for your personal belongings to be just in an area where only staff and volunteers can go. And so that'll be on the storage side. So when you're entering next time, make sure to enter through the right-hand door, and then the volunteer station will be there as well.
Awesome.
One small thing related to that too is I might be moving the glove station to the storage side as well, just to kind of keep that whole thing together. Also thinking about maybe we could put an extra shelf where those gloves are going to be too. So that's just another small thing related to the sign-in station.
Okay, I'll go to the next slide. If my computer will allow me to. Give me a second. There we go.
So the next change that we will be implementing is the shopping model. So I know that most of you have started volunteering during COVID, and you are not familiar with how the food shelf had operated pre-COVID or our shopping lists when we were doing in-person shopping. So with this change, we want to make sure that the new shopping model, when families come in, or when our participants come in, it is straightforward and clear-cut as possible. And so one thing that we will be implementing instead of using those shopping lists is a color-coded number system. So this example, the picture that's on the slide, there was some confusion yesterday in our first training, is just an example of what you might see for a food category. So if you can envision the food shelf layout that was on the previous slide that Emma showed, we had our canned fruits and vegetables in that very first section, the first part of the shop when a participant comes in. So you would see that the title at the very top of the shelf that says canned fruits and vegetables. And next to that, you would see this color-coded system next to it that says 24466. When a family or individual comes into the food shelf, they will be given a color-coded card that's blank, but will indicate their household size. This is something that Tyler or myself or another staff member will give to the participant that is shopping through. You don't necessarily need to know what the household size is, but just knowing what that color is. So for example, I'm going to pick on you, Carrie. If Carrie, you came in, you have a household of 3 people and you got a yellow card, when you got to the canned fruits and vegetables section, we would know that you'd be able to select 4 items from that canned fruits and vegetables section. So this change will allow participants to choose their own items up to that number limit. And we're hoping to use like a laminated color coding card and use a plastic sleeve that we will put the card in and hang that on the cart so that it'll be easily visible by you, by staff member, and the participant that's shopping what their color coded card is. So the example the picture that Emma made is a green card. So for that family in this example would be able to select 6 items. Yeah, any other things that I might be missing about the shopping model, Emma?
No, I think you got that one.
Changes to food categories. The intention behind the changes is, like Emma had mentioned, is to make them very broad and to be able to stock our shelves and fill them with a variety of different options. And it should be easier for you all as volunteers to stock the shelves, as well as our families to find what they're looking for. The idea behind the changes to the food categories is to allow us to fill the shelves with what we have in inventory. So let's say if we didn't have soup for some reason, that entire shelf wouldn't be empty. We would be filling it with other things. And we want our families to feel like our food shelf is bountiful. We have a lot of options, and we're going to make sure that their family gets what they need and that they don't feel like we might run out of something. We definitely want to avoid that scarcity sort of mindset that a lot of our participants might be experiencing that come through our food shelf. So I'm going to let you all read these categories, and we'll talk about them when you come in for your first shift with the change, but I'll just highlight the ones with the asterisks. So one of the biggest changes is grains. That's going to be one of our new food categories. So that will include all of our cereal, our pasta noodles, rice, and oatmeal. And then next would be dry protein. This would cover all non-perishable items that are protein. So dry beans, canned beans, peanut butter, canned meat, and canned fish. That will all be covered under dry protein. And then the last biggest change is the prepared meals section. So if you recall, the food shelf before had a section for soup, a section for boxed meals, and now we're going to lump that all together. So that will include all of your hamburger helper style meals, canned soups, mac and cheese, ramen, and other boxed and packaged meals. Yeah, and so like I mentioned, we will walk through the food shelf with you for your first shift and answer any questions that you have. But the goal is to make it very clear for you and for all of the participants that come through, like what's going where and where they can find items.
We also plan to post signs with all of the food categories on them, so they're easily accessible. If you're not sure where to put something, we'll have signs up for you guys as well.
All right, so the next thing we're going to cover today is the changes in volunteer roles. So as you all know, with Emma's updated emails and the surveys that we've been sending out, the biggest change now is having an in-market volunteer, someone that's comfortable with being client-facing, and then having storage side volunteers. So the in-market volunteers, the main responsibilities will be greeting, guiding, restocking, and sanitizing. We'll dive into that a little bit more in the next slide. And then for the storage side volunteers, it'll be organizing, assisting with stocking, donations, in particular greeting donors and reporting donations. And we'll dive into that a little bit more too. So in-market volunteers, as you can see by our very lovely clip art graphics here, we're going to have 2 in-market volunteers for each shift. The first person is going to be stationed by those paper bags and canned produce. And then the second person is going to be stationed by our cooler items. So the dairy fridge, deli fridge, and the meat freezer. The front/produce station volunteer will really be responsible for greeting our participants, maybe getting their cart ready, maybe Tyler's handing you their color-coded card and you're placing it in that plastic sleeve on the cart for them, and then guiding them through the new shopping model, explaining the process to them, and then restocking in between, with downtimes. Maybe another participant hasn't come in yet, and so we could do a little bit of restocking. Restocking with this change is going to look a little bit different, where we want to be mindful of everybody's comfort level. So with restocking, what we're thinking is maybe if you're the front produce person and you want to be helping out with restocking because there's some downtime, you might call over to the storage side volunteer and ask if they could get a cart ready of maybe you need more canned pears. And so that storage side volunteer could maybe get a cart ready with a couple cases of canned pears. And we could, as a staff member, another volunteer, bring that over to you and you could stock when there's time. So that's kind of what we're envisioning right now. But as I'd mentioned, we're going to be flexible and that might change as we figure out what works best and what doesn't. And then as for the dairy deli meat volunteer, you're also going to be guiding and assisting the shopper with the cooler items. And so there will be signage on each of the coolers for limits on how much an individual or family might be able to take based on their household size, and just explaining how that shopping system works if they have questions. At the very end, you might be helping sanitize carts or sanitizing cooler handles, as well as restocking. So one thing that I want to emphasize with this change is that it really takes a village. We are trying to really emphasize our safety protocols and sanitizing of high touch surfaces and masking and social distancing, but we really need the support of all of our volunteers as well as our staff members to make sure that this change is implemented and that we continue to keep up with best practices. So when you can in your station, sanitizing your high touch surfaces, that would be super, super helpful. Moving on to.
So I was going to add really quick, one thing that we were going to mention, we are only going to allow 2 shoppers at a time in the space. And so that is something that when this shopper's here with this volunteer, then we'll have another shopper over here, and that shopper will need to leave before the next one enters. So we're really only going to have 2 shoppers in the space at a time just to make sure we can socially distance. And that's why we're increasing the aisle size as well. And this is going to be a new system, not only for all of you, but our participants as well. None of our participants have used this color-coded system. And while it's an easier way and a way to break down language barriers, we'll still have to explain it. And so that front volunteer, once Tyler, I tried to find a picture of Tyler that I could put by the desk. I couldn't find one though. But once Tyler cues someone in, then that volunteer will kind of have to talk through what the color codes looks like and kind of guide them, especially within this first month when people are trying this new system for the first time.
All right, great. So the storage side volunteer, the main tasks for this role really won't be changing that much. You'll still be responsible for organizing the back, maybe unloading deliveries if there are still pallets in the storage area, assisting with stocking. So as I mentioned earlier, getting that cart of pears ready if the in-market side volunteer is looking for a particular item. We also plan to have a whiteboard in the back that has a list of kind of ongoing tasks that we'll always need support with on the storage side. So if you're feeling like, oh yeah, there's, they were able to get through all of the deliveries this morning, not sure what I should be doing, always check that whiteboard because Tyler and I will get a list together of some ongoing tasks we'll need to get done. And lastly, accepting donations, and I'll let Emma talk about that a little.
So as you guys know, we never know what we're going to get each day. Some days donations slowly trickle in, and other days we get thousands of pounds within a few hours. So you guys know that better than anyone. So I think it's really great that we're going to have designated storage side volunteers who can really help with that. And so while many of you have probably filled out a donation form, I'm just going to go through it really quick. When donors come, you guys all are welcoming for, so thank you for welcoming them. Donations are really big. While we do get food from Second Harvest and Food Rescue, we really couldn't serve the amount of people we serve without our donors. So thank you for thanking them, welcoming them, and making them feel comfortable in the space. We do ask that you make sure this form is filled out when a donor comes in. One, we use it for ourselves so we can properly thank the donor for their donation. And it's another way to report. So we put this in our database, and essentially this data is really important when we're asking for grant funding funding, as well as year-end reporting. And so we try to make sure these forms are filled out as much as possible. For the volunteer side, all you need to do is put the date received and then received by, make sure to write your name there. You can write volunteer by it too, but usually my coworkers are the ones who enter these and they go, do you know Carrie? And I'm like, oh yeah, she's a volunteer at Midway. So they know. But if you want to write volunteer next to your name too, that's great. And then for the donor information, usually you can just hand it over to the donor and say, can you please fill this out for us? And they just fill out this basic top info, as well as, you know, they can click this gift is food, or you guys can. And then if you can make sure to weigh the food and put the poundage on there, that's great. Sometimes the donor will ask for a receipt. So the top sheet goes to us. There's a bottom sheet as well, where there's a yellow sheet that you can hand to the donor for their receipt if they want one. Otherwise, you can just keep it for us. If a donor wishes to remain anonymous, that's completely fine. They can still fill out their info, and then they just got to click this little button or check that right there that says wishes to remain anonymous. And their name will not be public at all or anything like that. Another thing to note is we do have a lot of organizations that come on a weekly basis, maybe farmers market groups that come, or a bakery that comes. They do not need to fill out this form every time, but if you can make sure to at least get their name and maybe one phone number, then we can just make sure we already have them in our database, so we can just enter the extra poundage that they donated to us. So that's something to note as well. When in doubt, ask Tyler. He's there to help as well. He's done hundreds of these, so he knows how to do them as well. But this is just really important for our documentation for grants at the end of the year, so we appreciate your help with that.
One little small note about the receipts. Probably don't have to tell most of you this, but I've caught it a couple times. Please use a pen. If you use a pencil, does not bleed through, they can't use it. And some people have been using these Sharpies, which you would think would bleed through, but they don't either. So always use a pen. If there's not one back here, just come and find me. I got plenty of pens I'm hoarding, so.
Good thing to know.
I just have one more thing to add with the donation receipt for our regular volunteers. So volunteers, you know, that come almost weekly, like our St. Michael's donations, even though they don't need to fill out that donation receipt, we still want to fill out that donation receipt so we can record those pounds. That's just the last thing that I had to add. But,
exactly.
The next.
On that same note, you know, for those constant donations, if you get the weight, and even if you just put the donor organization name, like find out St. Michael's, you can just put St. Michael's, that's it, you know, and then the date up top. And like Emma said, either your name, volunteer, you can write my name too. I'm okay with that.
All right, so the next thing that we wanted to share with all of you are some best practices. The first thing we wanted to talk about is greeting. So if you're that front produce station volunteer, we want to make sure that we're welcoming the participant. We want to let them know that we're really happy that they're here to shop, and we're eager to help them as well. You will want to wait for the site manager, Tyler, to queue the next shopper. So they will wait in the lobby until Tyler tells them that we're ready for them to come through. You can help explain that shopping model to them and answer any questions that they might have too about the change or just the shopping experience in general. Assisting with shopping, that could just mean, you know, if they're looking for a particular item, or, you know, we need to restock something, or just guiding them through the new model, as well as explaining limits. Lastly, safety. So as I mentioned, you know, with the changes and with return to in-person shopping, we want to be increasing all of our safety practices. One of those things is masking. I know that Tyler is always telling people right when they come into our space that they need to wear a mask. That is our staff responsibility to make sure that we're reminding folks immediately when they step foot on our premises that they're wearing a mask. However, we do encourage all of you, if you do see someone that might be outside of Tyler's view, and if you see that they might not be wearing a mask above their nose, just as a quick reminder, if you're comfortable, just to say, hey, would you mind wearing your mask above your nose? That would be really great. And then, with there's downtime, sanitizing those high-touch surfaces, cooler handles, carts, that sort of thing. Encouraging social distancing, and gloves. So gloves has an asterisk next to it because this one is a multifaceted sort of safety precaution that we have. So typically we ask you all to wear gloves if you're touching food. So in theory, with in-person shopping, the participant will be doing all of their shopping on their own. You wouldn't likely need to be wearing gloves unless you're assisting with stocking for the early morning shift or maybe the midday shift or for the prep time before service starts. However, if you were the volunteer working with the cooler items and you might be helping a participant shop through our meat section or deli section, then you probably would want to wear gloves. Also, if that's something that makes you feel more comfortable, we definitely encourage you to do so. We will continue to offer gloves and extra masks and things like that in our volunteer space. So make sure to ask Tyler if you're not finding what you need, or myself, and we're happy to get those items for you. The second piece is some helpful phrases. So with our new shopping model, I'm sure a lot of you might be thinking, okay, well, limits, what does that look like? How do I make sure a participant is following their shopping limit? How do I have that conversation if I think someone's taking too much? So some phrases that we have available for you as a tool is to say, oh, it looks like your card is orange. You can take 4 items from this section. It looks like you have 5 items. Which 4 items would you like to keep? I would encourage all of you to not reach in and grab items out of a participant's cart. What they've put in their cart, we want to make sure, like I said, we're creating a welcoming environment. We want them to feel like in this space that it's a safe space for them to come in. And so maybe just having a very gentle conversation. If you think it's a reoccurring pattern or someone is very adamant and not working with you in terms of following the shopping limits, then either grab myself or Tyler or another staff member to have that conversation. If you feel at all uncomfortable having a conversation like that, then grab Tyler and myself or another staff member. These are just some tools that we have available to start that conversation. But again, if you're not comfortable, definitely grab a staff member. And then lastly, like I had mentioned, masking. And so that's something as participants are shopping through, if you wanted to gently remind a participant to cover their nose with their mask, we would definitely encourage that as well.
And I think Georgie hit the nail on the head by saying it's all about your comfort level. So we want you guys as volunteers to feel empowered and comfortable to say something and to use these phrases. But when in doubt, or if you don't feel comfortable, definitely, as Georgie said, reach out to staff. That's what we're here for. And then I'm really quick just going to talk about VicNet. So I'm not going to go through the nitty-gritty details of VicNet because most of you use it regularly. But just something to note as we made these shift changes on VicNet right here, the shifts will look a little bit different. So one thing to make sure that you're doing when you're signing up for a shift, let me move this over here. One thing to note when you're signing up for a shift is to make sure to check the note section. So for example, when we have an afternoon shift, make sure to make that you're checking in market or scheduling yourself for in market if you want to be in market, or on the storage side if you want to be storage side. So instead of just one volunteer shift and everybody has the same volunteer role, we've divided it. So just make sure to double check that. We also have a 12:15 to 1:15 midday service prep shift. We haven't had this in the past, but it's just going to be a way for us when participants are not in the space at a time to be able to easily restock the space. So we're really going to use this hour time just to get as much restocked as we can and prepare for that second service, because we can't really do that during service as much because we are going to have 2 participants in the space as well as 2 volunteers.
Also important to keep in mind about that midday shift in particular. The goal of that shift is a lot of whiteboard tasks. Ideally, I will not have to be doing as much directing during that time, since that is the time where I take my break normally. So those roles will be most likely, I will hand you a whiteboard when you arrive, or there'll be a whiteboard hanging up. And those volunteers will just be going through the tasks.
So feel free to listen to your favorite
Yes.
podcast or bring your favorite
Yeah.
music, jam out.
Yeah.
It's just an easy way over lunch to be doing something.
Mhm. Internally,
Okay.
we call that our introvert volunteership.
Yes. And Carrie, sorry I used your picture, but it's a good one.
Star.
Okay, so questions. We're ready for them.